What you are about to hear is not a movie. It is not a thriller. It is the story of two fighter pilots who stood between an entire naval fleet and total destruction, armed with 5 missiles, a cannon, and almost no fuel left. I am Kundi, and this is Pulse American News. It began just before 8 in the morning over the Persian Gulf. The air was already thick with heat and tension. 2 American F-18 Super Hornets were flying a standard combat air patrol, holding position between a U.S. Navy destroyer and the coastline of a harbor on the Iranian side. Their job was simple on paper: protect the fleet, keep the sky clean, come home alive. Then the call came in from the surveillance aircraft orbiting high above them. Contacts, multiple, low and slow, coming straight at them. The pilots did not hesitate. They banked hard and accelerated toward the incoming targets. What they did not know in that moment was that Iran had planned for exactly this. Every move they were about to make had already been calculated by someone sitting behind a desk on the other side of the water. The pilots were flying into a trap designed to look like a shooting gallery. The targets were small propeller-driven drones, unmanned and cheap, launched from a converted cargo ship that Iran had fitted with a ramp and called a naval vessel. The drones were basic. Their engines were no bigger than what you would find in a lawnmower. Their radar signature was so tiny that the pilot's sensors could barely separate them from the warm water below. The nose-mounted thermal camera picked up the first drone at 11 miles out, a faint smear of heat against a sun-warmed sea. The pilot selected a heat-seeking missile and waited for the targeting tone to confirm a solid lock. The seeker struggled. The drone's small piston engine barely produced enough heat to stand out from the background. The tone wavered. It firmed briefly, then it broke completely. He repositioned, trying to angle the missile seeker against open sky instead of warm water. The tone returned. 2 seconds of clean tracking. Then the drone turned slightly on its pre-programmed route and the angle collapsed. Gone. 2 attempts. No shot. The drone was still flying south toward the fleet. The clock was running. Each of those drones was 10 minutes away from reaching the destroyer screen, the outer ring of warships protecting the aircraft carrier beyond. And the missile seeker could not get a clean lock because the sea surface temperature was nearly identical to the drone's exhaust heat. That left the cannon, and using the cannon meant something that no rational pilot wants to do. It meant descending to low altitude, diving almost straight at an enemy coastline, flying in a straight line directly toward anti-aircraft positions at close range. A jet flying straight is a jet that is easy to shoot, but there was no other option. The pilot rolled the aircraft over and pushed the nose down. 8,000 feet, 6,000, 4. The harbor appeared in the canopy, massive and detailed and terrifyingly close. Cranes, buildings, and the unmistakable dark shapes of anti-aircraft gun positions getting larger by the second. On the waterfront, Iranian gunners behind manually operated heavy-caliber cannons spotted the descending fighter and started tracking it with their optical sights. They began firing. Streams of tracer rounds arced upward in curves that looked almost lazy from a distance and stopped being lazy completely around 3,000 feet. The pilot held the dive. He needed to get close enough for the cannon rounds to converge on the drone in a single, precise burst. He corrected his aim, held the trigger for half a second, and watched his rounds punch through the drone and tear the wing completely off. Then he hauled the aircraft into a hard climb and pulled through 2 streams of tracer fire that were converging on exactly the corridor he needed to fly through. A cannon round struck the intake housing on the left side of his aircraft. Engine instruments held normal. Whatever damage had been done, it had not found anything that mattered. Not yet. His partner, flying a few miles to the south, managed 2 clean missile shots against drones with better geometry and a cooler background behind them. 2 more destroyed. 4 intercepts total between the 2 jets. And each time they climbed back to altitude, the surveillance aircraft called new tracks departing from the same direction. The converted ship was launching drones every 60 seconds, each one packed with enough explosive to destroy the radar array on a destroyer, a $50,000 weapon aimed at a billion-dollar warship, an absurdly small price compared to what it was trying to kill. The lead pilot checked his remaining weapons. 2 missiles. His wingman had 3. 5 shots left between them against a ship that was launching faster than they could intercept. Every drone they shot down with a missile cost 20 times more to destroy than it cost to build. The economics of the battle were running hard against them, and the gunners on the coast were getting better with each pass. But the drone threat was only half the problem. Inside that converted ship, there were 8 heavyweight anti-ship cruise missiles, fast, long-range, and lethal enough to put a destroyer on the ocean floor. As long as the 2 fighter jets kept chasing drones, those missiles sat waiting, and each missile strike on a drone used up precious fuel, weapons, and time. Both American jets were each carrying 1 long-range anti-ship missile, an autonomous precision weapon designed to find and destroy enemy ships without guidance from the pilot once released. But using it meant splitting the patrol. 1 pilot heading north to attack the ship, his wingman stayed south alone. On the bridge of the converted ship, the captain watched his tactical display and understood the Americans' problem before they fully understood it themselves. 1 fighter coming north meant 1 weapon inbound. His short-range surface-to-air missiles were built for exactly this situation, killing a single attacking missile at close range. The real question was what the southern fighter would do. As long as that aircraft stayed busy chasing drones, the ship's 8 anti-ship cruise missiles had a clear path to
the American fleet, fast enough to outrun any response, powerful enough to sink what they hit. But firing those missiles required turning on the targeting radar, and the moment that radar came on, every passive sensor across the entire coalition force would pinpoint the ship's position in about 3 seconds. Right now, the ship was hiding, electronic signature reduced to almost nothing, blending into the electronic noise of a harbor full of burning and damaged vessels. Firing the missiles would trade that invisibility for 8 weapons in the air. The math only worked if the American pilots ran out of missiles first. A few more drone cycles, a few more shots off the rails, then the fleet would be exposed. Meanwhile, the lead was descending toward release altitude. The weapon needed him below 20,000 feet to solve the targeting geometry cleanly through the smoke rising from the harbor. But below 18,000 feet, he was inside the envelope of the ship's own surface-to-air missiles. 8 short-range interceptors on the ship's deck, each needing 8 continuous seconds of radar track before it could fire. The kind of math that only holds if nobody is shooting at you, which is exactly the kind of math that never holds in real combat. At 25,000 feet, the ship's search radar swept across his altitude and moved on. The return was still too faint to trigger a firing solution. He kept descending. At 23,000 feet, the radar swept him again, a brief warning tone on his instruments. Sniffing, but not locking. He kept going. Each 1,000 feet lower brought the release point closer and the danger closer at exactly the same rate. The weapon needed him at 16,000 feet. The ship's interceptors could reach out and hit him at 17. There was nearly 1,000 feet of airspace where both conditions were true at the same time. Then the surveillance aircraft above cut into the radio with an urgent call. A fast-moving aircraft contact was racing south at supersonic speed, no friendly identification signal responding. The encrypted transponder that tells Allied aircraft apart from enemy aircraft was silent. The contact was fighter-sized, supersonic, and aimed directly at 2 jets that were nearly out of missiles and out of position. Iranian fighter or a friendly aircraft with damaged equipment. The wrong guess in either direction meant either a missile in the back or a catastrophic friendly fire incident. The lead pilot locked the contact at 40 miles. What he could not know, what nobody could tell him in that moment, was that another American jet with a malfunctioning transponder was running south toward a refueling aircraft, completely unaware that it had just become the most dangerous friendly contact in the entire operational area. An enemy pilot who knew he was being tracked would be pulling hard turns and dumping defensive flares. A friendly pilot with a broken transponder would have no idea he needed to do any of that. The aircraft flew straight, no evasive movement, no jamming. The lead pilot slewed his thermal camera on the contact at 15 miles. Twin tails, identical fuselage, another F-18, a black-painted variant, flying obliviously toward safety with no idea how close it had just come to being shot down by its own side. He broke off and turned back toward the ship. But those 90 seconds of chasing a friendly had punched a hole in the patrol. 3 drones flew through it unopposed, heading south toward the fleet. The wingman snapped his aircraft around and drove south after them. 1 missile left. He fired it at the first drone from 4 miles. Clean kill. Winchester on missiles, meaning completely out. 2 drones still flying. Only the cannon left, and using the cannon meant going back inside the gun envelope with nothing to protect him but timing and aggression. He dove into the anti-aircraft fire. The second drone went down to cannon fire from 800 meters. He hauled back through the heaviest ground fire he had faced all morning. A cannon round punched through the fuselage somewhere behind the cockpit. The aircraft snapped 5 degrees left before he corrected it. Hydraulic pressure on the left flight control system dropped and stabilized. The controls felt heavier, like steering a car with a slow leak in the power steering. Flyable, not right, but flyable. The lead pilot ran down the third drone on his thermal camera at a difficult angle, the kind of shot that is not in any training document, and destroyed it. Nothing reached the fleet. The wingman was now out of weapons entirely, on fuel barely sufficient for 1 landing attempt, hydraulics partially compromised, flying a jet that had been shot through twice. Below him, the ship was still cycling drones off the rail. At 16,000 feet, the release solution on the lead's heads-up display finally turned green. The ship's search radar hit his aircraft 1 final time at full power, lighting up his warning systems like a slot machine. But the solution was already solved. The weapon was already computing. Too late for the interceptors. Too late for the captain who had spent the entire morning building toward this exact moment. The long-range anti-ship missile dropped away from the wing, 2,500 pounds of passive sensors and on-board artificial intelligence, broadcasting nothing, listening for everything. A second weapon followed 30 seconds later. 2 autonomous weapons now running their own targeting process, independent of the pilots who released them. Inside the harbor, the first missile swept in at wave-top altitude, 15 feet above the Gulf surface, scanning the electromagnetic environment. The harbor was chaos, ships broadcasting distress signals across every frequency, fire control radars still cycling on vessels that had stopped being warships 20 minutes earlier. Half the harbor was burning and screaming electronically, a target-rich environment for a weapon trained to distinguish between things that are still fighting and things that are already dying. The weapon listened for 3 seconds and moved on. A sinking warship broadcasting distress sounds, nothing like a vessel still in the fight. The weapon was specifically trained on that difference. It swept south and found something quieter, a navigation radar pulsing at steady intervals, radio communications on frequencies used by the Revolutionary Guard units, a ship running dark but not dark enough. The missile corrected course toward it. On the converted ship, the weapons operator picked up the inbound contact at 8 kilometers, coming in at wave-top altitude on a flight profile his training had never covered. He tracked it manually, fighting the radar clutter generated by the wave surfaces below the missile's flight path. He got a tracking solution. He fired an interceptor. The interceptor streaked south on a closing path that should have killed the incoming missile in 4 seconds. At 3 kilometers, the target dropped into the trough between 2 waves at the exact moment the interceptor needed a clean radar return.
The image smeared across the Gulf surface. The interceptor detonated against empty water. $10 million of air defense development defeated by ocean waves. The second missile was still running its own targeting solution, undirected, autonomous, and completely aware of the ship's reduced electronic signature. The captain reached for the launch panel on the bridge. This was the moment he had spent the entire morning building toward. Combat air patrol depleted, fleet defenses stretched, 8 cruise missiles ready. He keyed the activation sequence. The aft launcher crew started warming the targeting radar. 3 seconds, that was all he needed to generate coordinates and put 8 weapons in the air before any American ship could react. The first weapon hit the forward section of the ship, drone airframes packed next to fuel containers. The deck tilted before the captain's hand could complete the sequence. The launch rail moved past the angle the missiles needed to fire safely. The second weapon hit the waterline amidships. The Gulf poured in through commercial-grade hull plating that was never designed to absorb a large warhead. The improvised flight ramp bolted onto a 26-year-old cargo ship tilted past the point of no return. The 8 cruise missiles that were supposed to change the balance of the battle stayed exactly where they were. Nothing reached the fleet. Not a single weapon, not one drone, not one missile. 2 pilots, 5 shots between them at the start of the morning, flying aircraft that had been shot through by cannon fire, managed by the end of it to hold a line that should not have held. This is the kind of story that doesn't make headlines in the way it deserves to. The dramatic moments are the explosions and the strikes. The invisible moments, the ones that mattered most, are the ones where a pilot holds a dive into anti-aircraft fire, or an autonomous weapon chooses the right target from a harbor full of noise, or a wingman with no weapons left and barely enough fuel pushes back into a gunfight because there is nobody else. I am Kundi from Pulse America News. If this story reached you, share it with someone who needs to understand what real air combat actually looks like. We'll see you in the next one.